grumblings of discontent amongst the taxi industry that the City of Cape Town is proposing to implement new bylaws that will make provision for impoundment of any motor vehicle committing serious moving violations on the road. And taxis have often come under the spotlight when we're talking about moving violations. Santaco says that the city is being irresponsible. But we also don't want to see us go back to mid last year when we had a devastating taxi strike here in the Western Cape. Of course, cost the local economy. It cost lives. So where is a truce? There has been a truce declared between the city and taxi bosses, but is that truce on rocky ground? Mandla Hermanus speaks for Santaco here in the Western Cape. Good morning, Mandla. Really appreciate your time. The city says it wants to, and it's in line with the South African Constitution to implement bylaws that will make it legal to impound any motor vehicle committing serious moving violations on the road, and often taxis are roped into that particular conversation. Your thoughts on the city's proposal?
Good morning. It's disappointing, but we were expecting it to that at some point these bylaws, because the city did promise, even after the stay away last year when we returned to the task team, the city did indicate that should they not be able to gate their way with the amended conditions on our operating licenses, then they would use the bylaws to implement the impoundment. It's disappointing because, first of all, what it says is that the city is prepared to go against national legislation under which they always claimed to be impounding our vehicles. So, but we are not going to take it lying down, obviously, because we have to protect the interests of our members and ensure that when we get impounded, it's in terms of national legislation which provides for impoundment of public transport vehicles.
But Mandla, we also need mechanisms to change driver behavior. And I'll say collectively, all of us have erred when we're on the road, and we may have had a moving violation. Unfortunately, taxi operators have a particular stigma attached to them. But what then, if not using a law or a bylaw to change driver behavior, what then else would work if taxis are largely seen as those who infringe on road safety laws with moving violations? How do we then change driver behavior?
It's two things. First of all, you implement the law. We never said that the city must compromise on enforcing the law, but the law must be enforced correctly. Anyone who drives recklessly on the roads, that person can be issued with a fine, and also depending on the seriousness of the violation, a person can actually be arrested for endangering lives of other road users. So we've never said the city must compromise on that. That's one. You implement the law and you deal with the perpetrators. Secondly, as Santaco, together with the city and province, we have to undergo a process of actually training these drivers, because currently what the drivers get is a PDP, which normally just tests whether a person is medically fit to drive a vehicle. So we were saying we need something in addition to that, where we actually accredit these drivers, and so that we make sure that we give them the tools to understand the responsibility that they carry when they are on our roads. And those programs are there. There are proposals that the city was considering. There's a program that we are calling it Shayela Smart, which includes the use of technology to track and monitor the behavior of our drivers, because we were saying if we are given that ability, then we can also self-manage, self-monitor, and take corrective steps when our drivers are transgressing. But we never said there must be a compromise on law on law enforcement.
So you're saying yes, fine, yes, arrest if necessary, but leave
Yes.
taxi owners' property alone. Is that what you're saying?
That's what we are saying, because these taxis are businesses. So every time you impound a taxi for driver behavior, you are actually shutting down that business. And yet, if there are instances where we agree vehicles should be impounded and must be impounded, but where a legal driver with a driver's license and a PDP who has agency, who understands what it means to drive on the roads, whether you are driving a minibus taxi or a private vehicle, because we assume if you've got a driver's license and a PDP, you know the rules of the road. So we are saying the drivers must and should be held accountable when they transgress, but the city tends to want to simply impound vehicles and let the drivers get away with murder, basically.
Then there should equally be a conversation between the owners of taxis and the operators, the drivers of taxis. We've had taxi operators on this show saying, well, because we have to pay a daily fee to the taxi owner, I have to meet a target. I may even have an assistant, a gachi, on the taxi that I must also have to pay. That is why I am trying to meet a target, and that is why I have to bend laws and certain cases to meet the targets. I can first pay the owner of that taxi and then take something home to my family. Shouldn't that then be a conversation between the owners of taxis and the drivers of taxis?
That is an ongoing conversation, because first of all, it's not correct to assume that taxi operators make unreasonable demands on taxi drivers to say they must bring in impossible amounts, which can only be accrued when people misbehave, overload, drive recklessly. There is no need to drive recklessly on the roads, skip red robots. You cannot justify that by saying you want to meet a target. And also, these targets are determined actually by the drivers themselves, because it's them who tell us what is possible on this route. But the business model has to change, because it incentivizes this bad driving only because a driver will make the target by 12 o'clock midday and then would want to make as much as possible from 12 o'clock until afternoon peak, so that he can take home almost the same amount as he would give the taxi operator. So the business model has to change. But that is a deeper conversation that we are actually having this conversation with the Cape Chamber, with the financing houses, to look at what can we do to mitigate, for example, the interest rates that we are charged as taxi operators when we acquire new vehicles, because this has a ripple effect also on what a taxi operator expects, because you have to meet these repayments. And remember, we are not subsidized, so we are actually putting our own funds to subsidize public transport in the province.
Mandla Hermanus, really appreciate your time. Santaco Western Cape chairperson.